Hello there. Hey, little Luca. Hey. This is my son, Luca. As you can see, he's very cute. And he's over 6 weeks old. So today I thought I would take his moment of happiness and bliss to record this video. I had a very long, severe kind of birth experience, in my opinion, and from what I've heard. He lost a sock. Woo! Everyone knows those socks don't stay on. So I wanted to share my birth story a little bit because it went completely not as planned. And while it could have been worse for sure, it was definitely quite the experience, and I'm forever changed for it. It was one of the craziest, hardest things I've ever been through in my life. Actually, probably the. So it all started in the early AM on Thursday, July 28th. I was waking up with a different kind of contraction than I'd experienced before, enough where I could not sleep through them. And they were regular. They were at that point, oh my goodness. 1 second, folks. It's okay. At that point, they were about 6 or 7 minutes apart and consistent. They were definitely painful. It definitely got worse from there, but they were different from all the Braxton Hicks I'd been experiencing for the last months, and different than the contractions I'd had the last couple nights that were different but not as intense. But I knew that this was it, so we were timing them. I woke my husband and we decided to time them, and we ended up calling the midwife and letting her know where I was at because we felt that I was already quite regular, and it was definitely painful. At this point, it was still easy for me to talk before and after. I wasn't, it was definitely early labor. I didn't sleep anymore that night. I think it was like around 1 or something when I started, when I woke up and I couldn't get back to sleep. Starting in the morning, we really wanted the midwives to come. It was staying pretty regular. In fact, it was increasing. I had my mom come over around noon on that day. Told her not to rush because I knew I had some time to go. When she got here, she started timing my contractions and finding that at some point they were getting to be 2 to 3 minutes apart. And they weren't at the peak of pain yet, but they were quite regular. So I was like, all right, we really need the midwife here. And I remember just feeling like without her there, I couldn't really progress. I was like, I can't give birth without her here. So something that was weird for me was that I seemed to have too much control over my contractions, like whether or not they would be frequent or intense had so much to do with like my state of being, my mentality. It was weird. I prefer that it would just happen to me, but instead my fears about the midwife not being there seemed to slow things down to where I wasn't 2 or 3 minutes apart anymore. I was more like 5, 6, or 7 minutes apart. Well, anyway, the midwives didn't get there till about 6 p.m. on day 1, and they left and they came back around like 9 or 10 or something. And so I was just like not feeling confident to progress labor without them in my mentality, and I feel like it was kind of like a whiplash. And at that point I was like, all right, let's get going here. And I just wasn't progressing enough, but the contractions were starting to get a lot more painful. It was hard for me to just breathe through them. The midwives ended up staying the night. They thought, they better be there overnight, and they were. I got almost no sleep. I got a few bits of sleep in the bath. I went into the bath, and it kind of helped relieve the severity of the contractions enough where I could sleep in between contractions. I wasn't too like jolted by them. So I was able to get a few, maybe a max of 1 or 2 hours of sleep, all broken up. My mom stayed that first night as well, so she was there for like almost 12 hours the first time. In the next morning, I had not really become more regular. However, the contractions were a lot more painful at that point, getting to the point where it was very hard to bear. And they were probably like anywhere between like 5 and 10 minutes apart. At that point, I told my mom to go home to take the day, and I will call her when I think I'm closer. and the midwives weren't there most of the day either. They ended up coming again in the evening, but they had told me to do some type of circuit where it basically helps ensure that your baby's in the right positioning. So I did 30 minutes of mild inversion, like leaning forward on my bed, 30 minutes of side lying, and then 30 minutes of sidestepping up and down the stairs. It was intense, and it was meant to make sure that baby's position is correct and give him a chance to reposition if needed. So to eliminate the possibility of him being in a bad spot or stuck. And it did slow down my labor a little bit, but then later it kind of went back to where it was before. Not super regular, but intense. At that point, the midwives came over around like 6 p.m., brought the pool. I wasn't necessarily planning to have a water birth or anything, but they kind of asked around and asked other women who had had long labors, like what was helpful for them, and the pool was a big one. So they got the pool and they set it up. I had my mom bring a hose for the pool, so she was there a little before them as we were setting up. I was in the pool for another 4 hours at least. Usually they don't let you stay in that long, but I really needed my body to be able to relax and rest even a little, and I probably caught a few Z's in there, maybe, in between a few contractions, but I really didn't sleep much at all. My mom stayed the night again, and my midwives stayed the night again, and then the following morning, I was still in so much pain, but I wasn't really feeling pushy. I wasn't feeling like I was progressing. I was just in a lot of pain and really, really sleep deprived. I was just really struggling. It had been over 2 days of labor at home. Obviously no pain meds because it's a home birth, so I was just going through all the pain naturally, and it was excruciating. I just couldn't stop saying, like, I just want this to be done. I'm just over the pain. I'm over the pain. I'm so over this. And I was doing everything I could to make sure there weren't any mental blocks for me, keeping me from progressing, because you know your body can stop or slow down or speed up labor depending on how safe it feels, how ready it feels. And I couldn't find anything. I couldn't figure out what would be standing in my way. Anyway, in the morning, I had had one cervical check on day 2, so they were able to see where I was at, and at that point, she believed that I was, like, I think she said 6 centimeters dilated. And then so day 3, she's like, we really need to know what's going on. I really didn't want cervical checks at all and wouldn't have required them if it were a smoother process, but I decided to let her check me again, just to see where we were at, and she ended up feeling that my tailbone had been broken in the past and was sticking in quite a bit out of its normal positioning, and she was worried that it might be causing some kind of obstruction. So she had to check me 2 more times in a row in different positionings to make sure that it wasn't in the way, and that was a huge scare for me. Shortly after that, she measured his heart rate again, and she was finding that it was suffering and not recovering well from the contractions, because he was just tired, and we were all tired. And so she strongly recommended that I either try and stop labor and sleep, which I didn't know was possible, or that I go in and get an epidural because it was getting to a point where my baby's life was at risk. And so we decided to go in, ended up there about an hour later, so it was around noon that we got to St. Luke's or so, and checked in and everything, and my contractions had slowed down on the drive a little bit, and slowed down because my body knew that I and my baby was not handling it well. But contractions in the car suck, guys. They're not fun. Oh my gosh, it hurts. But anyway, so I got in there and we decided to get the epidural going, and it took a few hours just with everything going on in the hospital. But I was able to get it eventually. I don't know about when, maybe 3 or something, 4, I don't know. And at that point, my contractions had become more painful again, and so I had to wait for a while. But I got it, and it worked like a charm for me at first. And shortly after, we talked about starting Pitocin because my body just wasn't naturally going. And since I refused antibiotics, they weren't willing to break my water to naturally induce, kind of. Yeah, so the epidural worked nicely. I was meant to sleep on it, but I had so much adrenaline in my body from all the pain I'd been through the last 2 days that I wasn't able to sleep. And because I felt so good, I was just like, oh my gosh, I feel so good. And I was just chatting up everyone in the room and like, ugh. So at that point, I'd called my sister to come and be a part of everything because she has a lot of hospital experience and I just felt she'd be really good in that role. And one of my midwives came to be a part of it too. I don't even remember really the hours after that because it felt like it all kind of went fast at that point, or that I just didn't have like the right concept of time. Starting in the late night, they were like, all right, you're out of 10, you're ready to push. Of course, I wasn't able to feel a lot. At that point, I had started to feel my left inner thigh with each contraction kind of nerve pain, and it didn't feel good, but I kind of felt something, which was helpful for pushing, but then everything else was numb and everything else, I just couldn't figure out how to push. But as I went, apparently his head was close and even visible for several hours, like 2 or 3 hours, and I ended up pushing for 4.5 hours. So he was kind of stuck, and my doctor was coming in and being like, well, if something doesn't change soon here, we're gonna have to talk about C-section or suction. And I said no, and she's like, well, at some point you're not gonna have a choice. So she left the room and my midwife was helping me out, and she's like, we need to change your positioning. You've been in the same position for like hours and he might be kind of stuck on something. So we flipped me over and then flipped me back, and at that point we started actually making progress. So it's really thanks to my midwife that I got to deliver vaginally at all. I didn't really realize this until later on when I was recapping with them. But also, like, while I'm pushing, I feel like I'm putting in the best effort I have in me, whatever I'm capable of. It was so hard, so challenging, the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And I know for a fact I was pulling from some supernatural source. God was giving me the grace because I had nothing left. I had no sleep for 3 days. You know, and I had been eating normally throughout labor, so I had some energy, but I had no sleep. I felt like I was in a different dimension when I started Pitocin, like after a while on Pitocin, and it started getting closer, and then I was starting to have to push. I felt like I was in a different world. I wasn't like fully present or aware of anyone or anything. I felt almost like I was dissociated, like looking down at myself or something, and it was so weird. It was almost like time didn't exist. And I felt like I was in a different room, even though I was always in the same room. I felt like I was in some like den or something, like dimly lit den. Anyway, it was the weirdest feeling ever. And I remember like being like, I feel like you guys sound like you're far away. Like I can hear myself really loud and you guys are really quiet. And I was just like verbalizing what I was experiencing. So in the pushing room or whatever, pushing time period, my husband, my sister, my midwife, and one amazing nurse were there the whole time for the 4.5 hours, kind of trading off, helping me push. I was doing the sheet pull a lot. So someone was pulling a sheet from in front of me and I was pulling back as hard as I could for several hours, like with each contraction. And it really helped me learn how to bear down right. So at first they tried to put a mirror in front of me, but it wasn't helpful. It actually was really discouraging because I couldn't see any improvement. But later on, once his head was showing, seeing in the mirror what was going on was so helpful for me to know what to do, because I started to see what was responding well, what was working well, and I could see his head. I could feel his head for like so long, guys. And then it took several more contractions, another hour or whatever, before like he was just slowly inching out with every contraction. It wasn't sudden at all. Finally, the doctor comes in. She's like, wow, whatever you did in here worked. So the position change, and she was like pretty on board with the vaginal birth at that point, even though I still went over the 4 hours they like to cap it off at. Also, I wanted to add that there was another heart rate scare toward the end of my pushing where they kind of lost him, and then when they found him, they found his heart rate was suffering, and it really was anxiety provoking for me in the moment, but he did recover with the position change too. So that was one of the big reasons why the position change was also recommended by my midwife. At that point, she was down there like applying oil to help prevent tearing to the perineum, and she was coaching me through pushes for a long time, and everyone was cheering me on, and I could just see it getting closer and closer. And toward the end, I noticed that anytime I coughed before a contraction, it kind of brought him down a little bit. And so I would cough, 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 and then push 3 times during the contraction. I pushed 3 times during every contraction. And it started to just slowly, he was closer and closer, and I was like, please. I had nothing in me at all. And yet I was working harder than I ever had in my entire life and powerfully bringing him down. And finally, after 4.5 hours of this crazy twilight zone of supernatural energy coursing through my body, like finally he comes. And I would say like pushing for me with epidural and stuff, it wasn't painful, it just was like really hard. Finally he came out, and the doctor pulled him out fast, against my wishes, but whatever. And I had a 2nd-degree tear, but she placed him right on my chest. And I got to have my moment, and I may or may not insert the video clip here.
Big breath. Heart. What's up, baby?
Hardest ever.
Yes. Yep. Hardest ever. Hi, baby. Keep going. Here, baby. Here. Grab your baby.
It was so surreal, I couldn't even believe it. He was on my chest, and I was just amazed, and I was bawling, and they waited until the cord was white and free of any blood. All the blood got to our baby, and then they cut it. My sister actually got to cut it, and my husband got to hold him, and I held him, and I was just crying. And finally I'm like, don't you need to like take him and like measure him and stuff? And so they did. But he was in the room at all times and never left my sight. My eyes at this point, I felt like I'd popped every blood vessel, and I was looking across the room like, Kaylee, there's 2 of you. Like, I was in bad shape. And the next day I was so sore. Every part of my body was just the sorest it's ever been in my life, and it was so hard to move or do anything. I really honestly don't remember the time and order of things for at least the next day. I know we tried to get some sleep. I think we got like 2-3-hour increments of sleep on night 1. And yeah, so basically it ended up being 58 hours at home, 17 hours in the hospital, a total of 75 hours of labor, most of which was excruciating. And we didn't have the home birth that I wanted, but thank the Lord I was able to deliver vaginally. Thank my midwife for recommending the position change so that he could adjust better into the pelvis. The hospital was really great. Almost all the staff really were sensitive to our alternative way of thinking, and we refused a lot of practices that are considered normal protocol in births in the hospital just because I have different thoughts about them. And they were really working with us on that. I left the hospital feeling great, feeling so blessed, and just felt like my world was turned upside down. Like everything had changed. We had this baby in our car, and hey, you're so cute. And he was from our bodies, and he was ours. And of course, I was in so much a world of hurt, like so much pain, and getting home was rough, and the first weeks were rough, which I will talk about in another video. But I was just so grateful that everyone was okay, and just glad to be a mom and to take our little guy home. Hey! I probably missed some stuff on that, but it was basically the longest labor I've ever heard of, and I do believe that if I did not transfer, I could have died. And the reason I'd say that is because I was so sleep deprived. I feel like my body wouldn't have been able to keep up. Yeah, I just genuinely feel like I had to go in. I had no choice for me and my baby. So I love alternative healing. I'm a big alternative advocate, but I also know that there's a time and place for the medical system, and this was one of them, and I'm really grateful that they have the resources they have. it's interesting because looking back, even though I remember how intense it was and how hard it was for me and how I felt, I don't remember like exactly what contractions felt like. It's crazy how quick our bodies are made to kind of forget the pain of birth. It's just part of the female psyche. We're not meant to remember the details of it, otherwise we would never do it again. But I also know that looking back, I don't even hesitate to say that it was all worth it for our son. Even though pregnancy, birth, everything was so hard on me, I still know without a doubt that he is worth every discomfort and pain and trauma that I went through. So it's beautiful and it's amazing, and I feel forever changed and forever grateful. And he's the cutest ever, and he's been so good for this video. I want to take a moment to just express my pure gratitude to everyone who's involved in my birth. My husband was a rock. He was there for me through it all. Of course, I told him to go sleep sometimes because one of us needs to be rested, right? But he didn't sleep a lot. He really was there for me and supported me the whole time. And even though it's not really his thing to be right there and so involved, he helped me push. Like, he just did so much, and I felt so supported and cared for by him and felt like I wasn't alone. So that was amazing. I want to thank my mom for being there 2 separate occasions, not getting a lot of sleep and just trying to help push and encourage me to keep going. My sister, who was able to come to the hospital because she was such a calming and amazing presence to have there. My midwives, who had to deal with a very unpredictable first-time mama, and just the concerns and fears of not knowing when and what and how things are going to happen because it's so unusual, and just saying the hard things that I didn't want to hear, but also just being there and trying to help encourage me too. And especially Rosalind, for coming to the hospital and being there through the pushing as well. She was adamant on being there, and I was so blessed by her presence, and honestly I believe that I had a vaginal birth because of her. So really just grateful to every single person who was a part of my birth story. And a lot of the staff, almost everyone at St. Luke's, were just amazing. We felt really well taken care of there. But yeah, more on that later. So yeah, I just really wanted to add that because especially like my husband just went above and beyond just to be there for me, even though it was uncomfortable and hard for him to see me in pain so long. So if you want to hear more about my story, going more into detail, or if you have any questions, feel free to drop them down below. I have a lot to talk about regarding the experiences I went through. But this is just kind of a quick recap of what everything happened, how it went down, and yeah, so mostly for my records, but also for anyone who might want to know. He says we're done with the video, right? All right. Well, thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.